Hei, Ed Brown her fra Stefanus-alliansen. Vi er en misjons- og menneskerettighetsorganisasjon. Og vi eksisterer fordi millioner av mennesker diskrimineres og forfølges for sin tro. I Forum Stefanus får vi møte noen av disse modige menneskene, våre partnere som står midt oppe i kampen for trosfrihet. Velkommen til Forum Stefanus.
Vi har gleden av å invitere Ben Rogers fra vår søsterorganisasjon i UK, CSW, på besøk i dag. Ben er en god venn av meg. Han og jeg har reist rundt mange steder i Sørøst-Asia. Husker godt da vi måtte gjemme oss i jungelen rett over grensen i Thailand etter å ha vært i Myanmar, mens militær og politiet kjørte frem og tilbake og lette etter to hvite menn som hadde sneket seg over grensen. Så vi har en veldig god historie sammen, og jeg gleder meg veldig til å snakke litt med Ben i dag. So Ben, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to talking with you today.
Thank you, Ed. It's great to be with you.
Good. Maybe you could just share with us a little bit about your work at CSW. Maybe prior to CSW, you are the Southeast Asia team leader there. Tell us something about the work that you do.
Yes, so I have worked full-time for CSW since 2004, so about 16 years now. For the last 10 years, I've led the East and Southeast Asia team, working on North Korea, Myanmar or Burma, Indonesia, China, and overseeing work in the rest of the region in Vietnam and Laos. Before that, in my first few years in CSW, I also had parts of South Asia. So I have experience of working on Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Not India itself, although I travel to India very often, in fact, including once with you, Ed, for Myanmar work. But before going full-time with CSW, I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years, where I worked as a journalist full-time. But started CSW in Hong Kong in my spare time. That was the first 5 years after the handover of Hong Kong from 1997 to 2002. And before that, when I was a university student and even just before going to university, I spent a lot of time in China. So Asia as a whole, and particularly China and Southeast Asia, have been a big part of my life really since I left school.
Thank you, Ben, for sharing that information. You have extensive experience in the region and have seen lots of challenges. I was sharing in the introduction in Norwegian how you and I made that trip. We were in India and we also were in Thailand, and how we snuck over the border together and then were almost chased by the police and the military. So you and I have a good long history together, and I consider you a good friend. You know the area really well. Could you share with us some of the challenges that you see? Has there been a decline? Has there been any development in the area of freedom of religion or belief and human rights in general in this region? And maybe speak specifically about China and maybe the situation in Hong Kong right now.
Yes, I think over the years that I have worked in this area of freedom of religion or belief, which altogether, if I include the time where I was involved in this work but not full-time, it's been about 26 years. I first got involved with CSW as a student 26 years ago. And in that time, I would say there's certainly been a significant decline in freedom of religion or belief, or to put it another way, a rise in violations of freedom of religion or belief. Particularly in China, which you ask about, I would say China today is facing the worst crackdown on religion, really since the Cultural Revolution. Across the board, we've seen thousands of crosses destroyed, churches destroyed. Even the state-controlled churches, which are supposed to be permitted, are under intense pressure to, for example, have Communist Party slogans alongside religious symbols, or sometimes in place of religious symbols in the church buildings, surveillance cameras recording who attends, a ban on under 18s from going to places of worship, and then of course the horrific plight of the Uyghur Muslims, where there are at least 1 million, some say as many as 3 million, incarcerated in prison camps and targeted for their religious belief. the situation in Tibet, the situation of Falun Gong meditative practitioners who continue to be seriously persecuted. In terms of Hong Kong until now we've certainly seen the erosion over the last few years of freedom generally. Freedom of religion or belief has not until now been directly affected. Possibly it was the one freedom that actually remained intact until now. But I always said that as long as freedom itself is attacked, sooner or later freedom of religion or belief will be affected. Yeah. And right now we're seeing the imposition by Beijing on Hong Kong of a national security law that will undoubtedly have an impact on freedom of religion or belief. It might not lead to, at least immediately, to the closure of places of worship or the destruction of places of worship, but I think it will lead to a much higher level of monitoring of sermons. So priests and pastors preaching about justice, for example, or human rights, could find themselves in trouble with the law. That's China and Hong Kong. But then if you look at Myanmar, we've seen a rise in religious nationalism and religious hatred throughout the country. The plight of the Rohingya Muslims is perhaps best known to your viewers. But it's not only the Rohingyas. Other Muslims in Myanmar have been subjected to a terrible campaign of hatred, and Christians also are facing growing intolerance. And in Indonesia, which is a country that has traditionally had a good record of religious pluralism, is facing growing extremism, which is resulting in increasing pressure on religious minorities there. So it's a phenomenon throughout the region. I think the other good thing, the one good thing I would say though, is that as we've seen violations of freedom of religion or belief rise, we've also seen attention to freedom of religion or belief around the world increase as well, and that's a very welcome development.
Yeah, so that's important, I think, to also see that there has been some progress. It's easy sometimes for groups like ours to focus only on the negative and not see the positive examples, and then how can we emulate those and maybe use some of those examples other places as well. So it's good that you pointed that out. Are there any other sort of small lights that you see in the region, positive signs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the positive signs are, first of all, the example of both civil society and religious leaders who are trying to speak out against religious intolerance and violations of freedom of religion or belief. And that's encapsulated, as you know very well, in the network that you and I, together with other friends, have built over the last few years, the FoRB network, the Southeast Asia Freedom of Religion or Belief network, which meets once a year in a conference, but I think increasingly is growing into a real network. And that's at least it's a current light and a potentially even stronger light in the future. The other light that I also see in the region actually is Taiwan, which is a vibrant democracy that stands in stark contrast to the regime across the water in the People's Republic of China. And the current government in Taiwan has made the promotion of human rights generally and freedom of religion or belief in particular quite a priority. So last year I hadn't been to Taiwan for about 20 years, and within the space of about 3 months I went to Taiwan twice, on both occasions to attend 2 different conferences on freedom of religion or belief. And on both occasions the president of Taiwan opened the conference, made a very strong speech defending freedom of religion or belief. And at the first conference, she announced the appointment of Taiwan's first ever special ambassador for freedom of religion or belief. So I see Taiwan as quite a light in an otherwise rather dark region.
Yeah, because we've seen that exact move from a number of countries in the last decade or so, of appointing special ambassadors or special envoys. Your country recently did it. Norway has done it. Of course, the United States has had it, and other European countries have done it. So it's good to see that a South Asian country has done the same thing.
Absolutely.
Before I move to the next question that I told you I was going to ask about, let me ask a question I think would be very of interest for many of our viewers. CSW is a Christian organization. Stefanus Alliance is a Christian organization. Yet at the same time, we stand up for the rights of not only Christians, but as you were talking about earlier, the rights of Muslims, of Baha'is, of atheists, of others. Can you just encapsulate why you feel as a Christian we have the obligation, the duty to actually speak up on behalf of others who don't belong to our own particular religious group?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something I feel very passionate about, and I think it's vital for Christians to understand and to do. And I think there are several reasons for it. I mean, first of all, I think there's a biblical basis for it. We're told, for example, in Proverbs, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. It doesn't say speak up for your own kind, speak up for your fellow Christians alone. Of course, we do have a special responsibility for our fellow Christians, because if we don't speak up for our fellow Christians, in a sense, who will? But it doesn't have to end there, and it shouldn't end there. I always think of the example of the Good Samaritan, and if you look at the parallel, say, with humanitarian aid, I don't think, I think very few, if any, Christian humanitarian organizations would go to people who are in need of food and say, are you a Christian? We'll give you food. Are you not? We won't. We just wouldn't do that. And so why would we think of doing that with freedom? Freedom is indivisible, and you can't have freedom for some and not for others. But I also think there's in a way, almost a self-interest point of view as well, in the sense that what I found is actually, and this isn't the reason to do it. I mean, I think there's a moral reason to do it. We should do it because it's right. But the added benefit is, I found, as we have spoken up more for people of other faiths, or indeed people of no faith. I mean, I built quite a good relationship with the humanists in the UK, and we would disagree passionately if we got into a discussion about religion itself. But we agree fundamentally on the fact that every human being should have the freedom to choose, to change, to practice, to share their beliefs. And what I found is, as I defend people of other faiths or people of no faith, increasingly they have been speaking up for Christians more and more. And I think the more we can speak up for each other and for freedom of religion or belief for everyone, the more that will benefit everyone, including Christians.
All right. So you have biblical grounds, moral grounds, and then a pragmatic grounds as well. Yeah. Great. Thanks for sharing that, Ben. Back to the challenges in the region. What 2 or 3 things do you think could be done in the region, either by locals or by people on the outside, to help have a positive impact on freedom of religion or belief in the region?
I think probably the first is bringing people together more, which we've started to do through C4, but there are other examples of this being done as well. I think that very often, not intentionally and not because of any real ill will or anything like that, but just because people are busy and sort of just don't get around to it, people who are working on the same issue, maybe from different perspectives, are not necessarily in contact with each other. For example, human rights defenders and civil society activists working often at a grassroots level are not always in contact with religious leaders who are speaking out against religious intolerance and religious hatred. And I think through C4 and through other ways as well, bringing such people together so that they can share ideas, share information, build partnerships together is a really good thing, and that should be increased, and we need more of that. I think secondly, strengthening capacity. There are many extremely capable, knowledgeable, courageous and talented people in the region who are bravely standing up on the front lines. But sometimes maybe there are things that that people from outside can help them with in terms of knowledge of international frameworks, knowledge of the standards of documentation that may be needed to satisfy the international community. And I know that both Stefanus and CSW have done a lot of that in the past, and there's always room for more. So strengthening the capacity of people on the ground to speak for themselves and to advocate for themselves. And then I think the third thing, really, which I've already touched on, is people speaking up for each other. I remember, for example, a few years ago, the Cardinal of Myanmar, Cardinal Bo, and the daughter of the former president of Indonesia, Alissa Wahid, came together to co-author an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on the importance of defending freedom of religion or belief in Southeast Asia. And these were two people, a Catholic cardinal and a very prominent Muslim daughter of not only the former president of Indonesia, but actually the former head of Nahdlatul Ulama, which is the largest Muslim organization, in fact, in the world, just because of Indonesia's population. So the two of them coming together from their different religious perspectives, but two people who are well known for defending not only their own communities, but the rights of others. And I think the more we can do that, the better. So those three things, strengthening networks between people who don't normally get together, strengthening capacity, and building partnerships between people of different faiths to speak together are three of the things we can do more of in the region.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And then lastly, it's really easy, especially in these pandemic times, to get just focused on the negative. But I believe strongly that we are better people, and we thrive better when we're able to look at some of the good things in our lives. Can you just share with us 2 or 3 things that you're thankful for?
Absolutely. Well, I think I'm thankful first and foremost for my faith, because that keeps me going. I think it gives me a sense of perspective that yes, we're in very, very challenging times, and it doesn't lessen the not so much my own challenges, but it doesn't lessen the pain that the world is in, but it does give some sense of hope that we'll get through this, and that the lessons of both faith and history show that the world has faced challenges, big challenges before, and got through them, and will do so again. That's the first thing. So faith, hope, a sense of learning from history. Secondly, I'm thankful for my colleagues, both my immediate colleagues in CSW, and we, even though we're all working from home in different places, we're keeping in regular contact, we're supporting each other, we're praying with and for each other, and that's something really to be thankful for. And in addition to them, my wider friends and colleagues around the world, being able to have this conversation now, being able to be in touch with friends in Southeast Asia and beyond, and the really courageous work of particularly my friends and colleagues who are working on the front line, who are really risking their lives in this work. And then I think the third thing, which is linked to that but is different, is I'm really, really thankful for technology. Sometimes we, in normal times, technology gets a mixed press, and it sometimes gets blamed for some of the sort of dark things in the world. And that's true. I mean, there is bad stuff on the internet. The internet can be used for bad purposes. But I'm finding in this lockdown period that imagine if we had this, 100 years ago, where we wouldn't have been able to be in touch with each other and with people around the world that we care about. But even worse, we wouldn't have been able to be in touch with our immediate, families if we were separated from them. And thanks to things like Zoom and other platforms, I've been able to be in daily contact with my family, with friends, but also with people around the world. Since I can't travel like I would normally do, at least I'm able to talk with people. And more than that, actually do things like, webinars and speaking engagements. There's a slight downside to it, in that I had thought when the lockdown began that I might be able to take a step back and do some quieter things, some more reading, some more thinking. And the range of invitations for speaking engagements in webinars and interviews has been, more than I would have in normal times. So I'm busier than ever, and there's a downside to that, but there's a lot of blessing to it as well, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, we're very thankful that you've taken the time out of your very busy schedule to share with us, and it's something that the Christian church here in Norway, but in the UK where you are and other parts of the world, needs to hear. We need to know what's going on around the world. We need to be together with our brothers and sisters around the world and others who are suffering, and we need to see the silver lining in the clouds as well and recognize those. So I'm so very glad that we were able to talk together. We have regular conversations, of course, but not like this. I wish you all the best, and continue with the work that you're doing. And thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.